Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today, and trust me, I'd rather be out in my Pitts airplane right now than up here. And also, I have to apologize to you. I do not have a gift card for you today, unfortunately. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about US Tool to start with. The video did a good job of covering mostly our regrind part of our business. But I want to explain what integrated supply is. And then I'm going to tell you how we have successfully passed the company from generation to generation, okay? So most of the things on this slide have been covered in the video, but I wanted to point out one thing that we put on a lot of our advertising and so on, and that is American proud and family owned. And the family owned part is the important part, because when you have a privately held, family held business, we have so much more flexibility and agility than public companies. Public companies have to manage, and all they think about is, what's our stock price going to be this month? And if you don't keep the stock price up as CEO, you get fired. As a privately held company, I can't get fired, okay? I own all the stock, so I can make tough decisions, I can make long-term decisions, and I can decide to keep a department or a part of our business continuing an operation, even if it's not profitable and not going well, knowing that in the future it's going to come back and it's going to be profitable. You can't do that in a publicly held company. So and this is what makes the family held business so successful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what do we actually do at US Tool. We do make cutting tools, but what we really do is we manufacture fighter jets, commercial aircraft, and oops, how'd that get in there? So this is a picture of a typical aircraft manufacturing floor. This happens to be the Sikorsky, and this is the CH-53K heavy lift helicopter. And all of our customers look like this. And basically what we do is we buy the manufacturing supplies for them. If you look real closely here, you can see some of our cutting tools on that tool bench there that the mechanics are using. But all throughout the plant are all the items that we supply. And we supply them, actually I want to talk, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about one particular customer. SpaceX is one of our most interesting customers. We've had them for about 10 years. And it's really very exciting to provide them with their manufacturing supplies. Years ago, and you can see the shop floor there when we're starting up. It's really fun to walk through the manufacturing plant and look and say, well, there's a rocket there. There's a capsule for manned flight. There's a rocket engine that they're putting together, and it's really pretty amazing. And we're really proud when every time they launch, which now is about twice a week now, they launch and the first stage comes back and lands on a platform out in the Atlantic Ocean, and they hit that every time and land perfectly. It's quite amazing. If you have not seen that, please go online and look for SpaceX landing, okay, of the first stage booster. It's absolutely phenomenal, and it's amazing. So when we were starting this up, I always like to tell this story. My son Brent was out helping the team start up the program. And this is 10 years ago, and things were not going well. And that's typical of our startups, by the way. They always start off pretty rough, and after about 2 months, they're running pretty smoothly, and all is good. Well, Brent was out there, and things weren't going well, and he gathered the team together and said, team, we got to kind of get fired up here and get things going and get things under control. He said, after all, this is not rocket science. And he thought, well, actually, it is rocket science. So another one of my favorite stories, two people from accounting walked in my office this is about 3 or 4 years ago, and they said, Bruce, we have to write off two of our vending machines. I'm going to talk about our vending machines in a minute. We've got to write that off, and we don't know what reason to put down there for why we're writing it off. I said, well, what customer? And they said, SpaceX. And I said, SpaceX Cape Canaveral? And they said, yes. And I said, well, you mark that down as vending machines were destroyed in a rocket explosion. And they said, really? We can write that down in the books? And I said, yes. And they walked out of my office and said, this is the most exciting day we've ever had in accounting. This is how airplanes are actually built. You're looking inside of a 737 airplane on the right-hand side there. And you can see that basically airplanes are built by taking sheets of aluminum and composites and bolting them together and riveting them together. You can see the drill in the upper left corner. You can see the drill, one of our drills that we supplied, drilling a hole in the aluminum. They're put together. Some automation is used, but primarily it's basically a manual operation to put the airplane together. So if you look carefully at that, you can see all, in the right-hand picture, you can see all the rivets and bolts and stuff like that. And there we go. If you look right there, you can see the bolts that hold the window doors open or on the airplane, okay? And they are there. So I hope seeing this picture of what the inside of an airplane really looks like makes you feel very comfortable flying an airplane, because they are extremely well built. So our list of customers is a very impressive list. It's a who's who of aerospace: Northrop Grumman, GE Aviation, Gulfstream, Raytheon, and so on. It's a very, very impressive list. So what is integrated supply? In integrated supply, we buy all the indirect supplies for our customers. We do not sell flyaway parts. They have a completely different legal aspect to them. You know, for 30, 40 years, you're responsible for any part you sell to an aircraft. With indirect supplies, these are things like cutting tools, abrasives, protective equipment, scrapers, nozzles, all those kinds of things. And we inventory those. And then we supply them to the customer on an as-needed basis. And the mechanics come up to the crib. They issue the item out. We then charge our customer for it, and we also tell the customer what program that mechanic was working on. That's one way that they can get the material and supplies. The other way is through vending machines. We have about 2,000 vending machines spread out in North America on the manufacturing floor. And these are machines like this. And if you look at this machine right here, that looks like a candy machine that you get potato chips out of, right? Well, it kind of is, only it's super heavy duty. The customers our mechanics on the shop floor. They go up to the machine, they scan their badge, they punch in what tool they need, and some precision tool that they need, or safety glasses or whatever, come dispensed out of the machine. The other types of machines that we supply are machines like this. And you all have purchased sandwiches where you go up to a vending machine and there's sandwiches on this little wheel inside, a platen inside, and you push the button and the sandwiches go around. You say, that's the sandwich I want. And you put your money in, the door pops open. Well, this machine works the same way, except the operator goes up, punches in what they need on the screen, and the platen turns around because it knows where the item that they need is. It turns around, the door pops open, the mechanic takes the tool out, and they're charged for it at that time, and we know who got the tool, we know who to charge and what program to charge that particular item to. Probably a pretty cool system is this right here. That's an RFID IntelliPort. We put RFID tags on all the items that are in the crib, and the mechanic just walks in there, gathers what they need, walk out, and the arch here counts everything and bills it for them. So years ago, when we first got into vending machines, it was hard to sell them because people were saying, well, that's where I buy my potato chips. You can't issue a cutting tool, a precision cutting tool out of a vending machine. That's crazy. So one of the first sales calls we made was at GKN up here in St. Louis. And I walked into the room, and all 10 people were sitting there like this. When you walk into a room and you're giving a sales pitch and everybody's like this, you got a problem. So I thought, how am I going to break this and let them listen? Because they're not going to listen to a thing that I say. So I went in and I said, you guys, I've got an idea for you. We were their integrated supplier at the time. And I said to them, I've got an idea. I said, I think we should take all of your candy vending machines and potato chip vending machines and your soda machines and all the vending machines spread all around the plant. I think we should bring them all into one central location, and we should put it in like a room here and inventory things, hire people to staff it 24/7, and your employees can walk all the way across the plant to come here and get their soda pop and candy bars. And they looked at me and said, are you crazy? That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. I said, I agree, but that's the way you're managing your cutting tools today. And their arms went like this, and they started listening, and by the end of the day, we had sold our first 30 vending machines. So we have 10 warehouse locations throughout North America. We also have on-site facilities at many of our customers. That's the red dots. And just a little bit more information here. These are kits that we manufacture for repairs. For example, there's a fatigue crack or a bullet hole or something in an F-16. Lockheed defines a kit, and we manufacture the supplies and purchase the supplies that go into that kit to do the entire repair job on that aircraft. Lockheed then sends that kit to Saudi Arabia or wherever the aircraft is, and the maintenance people over there can repair the jet. This, in the center, we manufacture kits that show if a tool is missing. If you look at that, these are foam cutouts, and the tools fit in there, and if a tool is missing, it's very obvious. So when a mechanic goes on an aircraft to do some final assembly work, when they're inspected by security, when they come off, they're inspected again. If a tool is missing, they take that airplane apart if they have to find that tool. Because for some reason, the pilots, when they fly the first barrel roll, they don't want wrenches falling out and jamming in the controls. It's a big issue for the government. The Department of Defense is very focused on that FOD control. We also put together kits like this. Like, I call them surgical kits. Like, if you go in for an appendectomy, your surgeon peels open a surgical kit, and he stays right there operating on you, and everything he needs is right there. Well, we do the same thing for the aircraft mechanic. Everything is right there. They don't have to go anywhere. It's very convenient and much more efficient. So this is a picture of our Palmdale, California facility, and where we put the kits together, and a vending machine on the shop floor. So let's get down to business here. How did this all get started? And the answer is, my father, actually my grandfather, put together a company by the name of Son's Shoe Company. And it was after the war, and he wanted to provide a job for his boys that were coming home from the war. So that was set up in Bonne Terre, Missouri, just south of here, and they manufactured women's shoes. They went into production. For 10 years, they built the company up and did well in the beginning, and fed their families and so on. My father was the manufacturing person, and my uncles were the salespeople. And they did a great job selling because my father could hardly keep up with the production. But as time went on, the competition from abroad got more and more difficult. And one day, the vice president of manufacturing of my father's, of the shoe factory, came into my father's office, and his name was Bob. And he said, Paul, actually my father said to him, this business stinks. It's really hard to make a profit when the competitors overseas can ship a finished product in and sell it cheaper than we can buy the raw materials. We need to do something different. And Bob said, Paul, my uncle resharpens cutting tools in California, and he's willing to teach us how to do that. Unfortunately, Bob passed away soon after that, but my father went out to California, and he learned from a company by the name of Lobel Tool how to resharpen cutting tools. He bought some equipment from him and came back to Deloge, Missouri, and started U.S. tool grinding. he bought an old dairy processing and bottling building, and if you look carefully right here, right there, you can see it's Merchant's Dairy, and they actually processed milk and so on. The first day that they were in operation, the postman came to my father and said, what's the address of this place? And my father said, 34 Birch Street. And that was his lucky number, 34. So that became the address and still is today. So you can always define what you want things to be. So I was 10 years old when Dad started the business, and I thought Dad had gone crazy. He was going to sharpen the neighbors' drills, and he was going to feed us with the money he made with that. This didn't make sense to me. Well, he had a better plan, of course. His plan was to resharpen cutting tools for McDonnell Douglas here in St. Louis, which of course is now Boeing. So he borrowed $3,000. He set up business. He got the machines going. He hired employees and so on, and started in business. It was a tough business. Getting started, just like all of them are. As I said, he borrowed $3,000, but in the very beginning, he ended up on the reject list on McDonnell Douglas. He couldn't produce a tool that they would accept. So he realized at that time, I've got to find customers somewhere else. So he had to expand his vision and find other customers. And back then, there was a lot of manufacturing in St. Louis, Carter Carburetor and probably 30 other manufacturers. And he started calling on them. He started calling on trailer body companies and bus manufacturers and so on in a 3 or 4 state area, and started building his business up. So just to kind of fast forward one little story here, he was on the reject list when I came to the business many years later, and I'll tell that story in a minute. But he, I've been there about a year or something. He said, Bruce, I want you to go to St. Louis, and I want you to talk to Mr. Brett Schneider, okay? He's the procurement guy there, and see if you can get a qualification order from him. And I said, okay, and I put my sales materials together and put a good presentation together, and of course that was before computers and all that. And I went up and I spent an hour making my presentation. Lo and behold, Brett Schneider gave me the sample order, and he said, let's see if we can get you back on the approved list here. So I came back and I said to my father, I got the order, and he said, I am so proud of you, Bruce. I can't believe it. I've tried to get back on the approved list for 10 years, and you did it, and the sales presentation, fantastic. 20 years later, well after my father had passed away, I realized all of a sudden one day, it was like, that was a setup. My father already had that sample order, and he sent me up there and told Brett Schneider, run my son through the paces, and he did. So I joined the company in 1972, but before I joined, I realized that I really needed to get some experience working somewhere else. For my own self, I needed to know that I could be successful working at a company other than one that my daddy owned, okay? And so I worked at Anheuser-Busch, and I was their chief beer taster. Oh, I'm sorry. I was the flunky electrical engineer. Okay, I got that right. So I joined my father. My father called me up in 1972. I'd worked there at Anheuser-Busch about 2 years. And he said, I need to do something. I either need to hire a plant manager or I need to know, are you going to join the company? And I had known from the age of 10 that I was going to join my father in that business. There was no doubt about it. I knew I needed to get experience elsewhere. And I said, well, I thought I wanted to get 5 years of experience, but if now's the time, Dad, I'll be there. I'll be there in a month. So I joined him in 1972. The first day, I was driving into work down the highway, and I was all nervous and thinking, what's going to happen today? Drove right past the exit, went on to Bonne Terre, and had to circle back. So I finally walked in, and my father was sitting there, and I said, well, Dad, where's my desk? And he said, I don't know. Why don't you use this little typing table over here? And there was a typing table this big. Okay, and that became my desk for 6 months. And after 6 months, I finally said to my father, when's my desk going to get here? And he said, I don't know. Have you ordered it? I was like, okay, I see how that works, okay. So I asked my father that morning, I said, what should I do? And he said, well, I don't know. Why don't you go out in the plant and watch the guys grind tools? And I did. And that was the last time my father and I had to discuss what objectives I needed for myself personally as far as growing the company. From that point on, I went out there and I just knew what to do and knew what problems needed to be solved and what things needed to be done. My father and I worked very well together. He was incredible at letting me make my own mistakes, and I made plenty of them. He would guide me and that sort of thing, but basically he let me do my thing, and we got along great. My mother told me many, many years later, I didn't know this, but he would come home and he'd say, Mom would say, he would come home and he'd sit down and say, you won't believe what he's done now. So it was probably not quite as smooth as I thought it was. So the combination of my father's sales and business acumen and my engineering really gelled together and came together to really make the company grow and do well. My father had really run the business entirely himself, and he was exhausted with that. And when I came, it was like, there's finally somebody else here that can take some responsibility. Fortunately, he was able to spend more and more time doing other things, and he went out and started building a cabin, built a lake, and really had a lot of other wonderful activities that he really enjoyed. So it was great that he had that opportunity. I have 2 brothers and a sister, and my brother, Paul, joined the business in 1978. And Paul and I basically ran the business, and my father would open up the plant early in the morning, like 5:30 in the morning, and get things kind of going, and then he would wait until the mail got there, open it and get all the checks out and take it down and make the bank deposit and get all the orders out, and he was real excited about that, and he'd take off out to the cabin and spend the rest of the day there. So here's a couple photos here of those early days, and you can see my brother Paul, myself, my father, and Dorothy Graff, who was the plant manager at the time when I first arrived. This is me sitting on a pile of boxes, and that was our biggest order we ever received. It was 25,000 pounds, and we were very proud of that. You can see the building was kind of a ramshackle building, but it worked for us. So that's me right there, and yes, it's probably hard to recognize with all that hair. And I have to admit this, yes, that is a pocket protector. So this slide is pretty self-explanatory, I think. This is me receiving 2 shipments of machines. I told you I love machinery, and you can see the early days and the later days. You can tell which is the early days because that one I have hair, that one I do not have hair. So this slide is pretty self-explanatory. You all got it pretty much? So my father, when he started U.S. Tool, he gave 10% of the shares of stock to each of us kids evenly, and then he put the rest of the shares into a trust that was to be divided evenly to the other kids, to all of us kids, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, did I get it right? And upon his death, except he also, there we go. He also said 1 girl is worth 3 boys. So he gave my sister Meg 1 extra share of stock. Okay, that seems like no big deal. But after I'd worked at the company for several years, and I was there by myself, my brother hadn't joined yet, I went to my father and said, Dad, I've got a problem. Meg, with her extra share of stock, actually controls the company. With her and any one of my 2 brothers, they could sell the company out from under me, and I'm developing a career here, and I'm supporting my family with this, And I could be 40 years old, having spent half my life developing a career, and they could sell the company out from under me. I don't control it. Meg does. And my father was furious at me bringing that up, absolutely incensed that I would even bring it up, and said, I don't want to ever, I'll do with my stock what I choose. 2 years later, I bring it up again, the same reaction. Well, after about 10 years, we were in a annual financial review, and Bob Ingman, who remembers Bob Ingman? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you remember Bob. He was our financial advisor, and he was one of our trusted advisors, okay? And he was giving our annual report to the board, and my father was there, and all my brother, sister, and mother, and so on. And Bob said, now that we're finished with the financial review, are there any other questions? And I said, yeah, I have one. I said, I've got an issue with the 1 share of stock with Meg. And Bob turned to my father and said, Paul, who do you want to run the company after your death? Do you want Bruce and Paul to run it, or do you want Meg to run it? And he said, well, Bruce and Paul, of course. And he said, well, they can't do it. And that's when my father, I think, realized the meeting ended, nothing else was said. A month later, we walked in, and both Paul and I had 1 share of stock in our top desk drawer. So the problem was solved. And notice where it was signed right here. So many years went on, and unfortunately, in 1981, my father died. That left us with board members of Paul, myself, my brother, and my sister, and my mommy, okay? And we were having to run the company. And sometimes family boards work well, and sometimes they don't, okay? So we had 2 orders of business that we had to take care of from the very beginning. One was, who's going to be president? And the other was, who is going to be able to sit in Dad's desk, okay? And we couldn't make either of those decisions. So for 6 months, we had board meetings every month, and we tried to decide who was going to be president. I said, I want to be president. My brother Paul said, I want to be president. So we couldn't make a decision. So this went on, and finally, at a family dinner, my mother said, you guys, you all kids, sit down here. I want to tell you something. I didn't want to bring this up because I didn't want to make Paul mad. I didn't want to make Bruce mad. We can't make this decision. But I want to tell you that your father wrote the minutes for the meeting, the first meeting, the stockholders meeting after his death. He wrote those minutes out on a yellow piece of paper. And he settles this issue. And I'm going to bring it to the board meeting in 2 weeks. I was like, 2 weeks? Oh my gosh. So what does that yellow piece of paper say? So my mother, we opened the board meeting, my mother read the note, and the note said, the board unanimously adopts the resolution appreciating the contribution of the founder, Paul Williams. The second order of business, my brother Evan elects Bruce Williams as president and Paul Williams as vice president because the next 3 years are going to be very technical in nature. At that time, I told my family at the board meeting, I said, if you make me president, I will promise you that I will not make any decisions that Paul doesn't agree with. That was a big mistake. So what I should have said was, if you elect me president, I will run this company, I will make money, I will grow it. And if I don't do that, or you don't agree with what I do, fire me and hire Paul. That's what I should have done. So that started 5 years of Paul and I conflicting, trying to run the business, because Paul was the money hoarder. He liked to keep money in the bank and keep things safe and secure, and if there was money in there, he wouldn't want me to know. Because why? Because I would want to spend it on machinery and equipment. Now, I have to tell you, I searched the internet long and hard to find a picture of somebody wildly spending money on drill sharpening equipment. And that's the best I could come up with, so I'm sorry. So both of us were extreme. I mean, I was wrong on this side, and in my view, he was wrong on that side. I mean, we couldn't even agree on spending $30,000 on putting conveyor belts in there to transfer our work inside the plant. He didn't want to spend the $30,000, and I felt like this was an absolute necessity. We live with those conveyors today. I don't know what we do without them. We even argued about a paper punch binder that was $300 that I wanted to buy to bind books together for training manuals out in the plant. We couldn't even agree on that. So after 5 years, it became clear this wasn't going to work. And the board of directors decided we need to hire a consultant to come in and make it so that Bruce and Paul can work better together. So we hired a man by the name of John Messervy. He was from Chicago. He was another very valued advisor. He came down and spent 1 day a week for about 3 months, and he would interview Paul for 5 hours. He'd interview me for 5 hours, and he'd go back and forth, and then he'd fly home, and he'd come back the next week and talk to us. And I remember one time we were walking, through the plant, and he said, "Well, Bruce, what would you do if the plant burned down? Would you rebuild it?" And I said, "Absolutely. I'd rebuild it." I walked over to a cardboard box and picked up a pencil and started. I'd lay it out this way, and I'd have the machines in this position and the loading dock here and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, okay. And I'm sure he asked Paul the same question. I don't know how he answered. He probably said, "I'd put the money in the bank and invest it." I don't know. But anyway, John Messervy finally, after 3 months, he said to us, "I want to have a board meeting that's going to be 10 hours long, and it needs to be off-site next week." We're like, okay. So John brought his recommendations to that long meeting, and he started out by saying, these two should not be in business together. They have two incompatible modes of operation, and my recommendation is that Bruce buy the business from you siblings, and he will make an offer for that today. And I was like, I was? Okay. So John and I went off and had lunch, and he said, "Here's how you structure a buyout proposal." And of course, we had to base it on future appraisals and all that kind of stuff. And by the end of the day, I had made an offer for buying the company. It took probably 6 months to iron out all the idiosyncrasies and all the things that had to be done. But in the end, in 1986, I bought the company out. I remember Bob Ingman calling me up when we were putting all this together, and he said, "Bruce, I just realized at the price you're paying for the company, you're going to start out with a negative net worth." I was like, "Is that okay or not?" He's like, "I don't know. I've never had a company do that." And I said, "What about these startup companies out in California that are these internet things? They have negative net worth." "Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know." So anyway, this kicked off, when I bought the company, that kicked off a decade of basically working for my siblings. Every decision in the company went around, how are we going to produce the cash flow to make these payments? After about 7 or 8 years, I got to the point that the company started growing, we started becoming more profitable, and the payments became less of a burden and more easily taken care of. But it did stunt our growth because I couldn't spend it on wild drill grinding machines. So eventually the payments got small enough that we were doing okay. But I did at that time say to myself, giving a company equally to all the kids when only one is actually, or two are in the business, that doesn't work. I realized at that time that, let me back up. When Paul left the company, when I bought it out, on the way out, he handed me a 5.25 floppy disk that went to this IBM computer thing, okay? Does anybody remember 5.25 floppy disks? If you do, you're dating yourself, okay? Yeah, okay. You're as old as I am. And I went to the bookkeeper and I said, here's the financial end of the month report here. I need you to run that for the next month. And she looked at it and said, "I've never seen this report before." And I was like, "Really?" I said, "Well, do you know how to run the computer?" And she said, "No, I don't, and I have no interest in learning it," okay? So I went down to Walmart and I bought a Lotus 1-2-3 symphony book. Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about, okay? You just dated yourself, okay? That was a forerunner to Excel. So I bought that book and I had to learn how to close the books out. I was actually getting cash flow statements on little yellow pieces of paper. I think they were sticky notes, but Brent asked me, had they invented sticky notes by then? And I was like, I actually don't know, but I got them on little pieces of paper like this. And I knew at that time I needed to develop a team. Paul and I had run the company for years, and I had to have a team behind me. And that's when I realized I needed to go out and hire a vice president of finance. I needed to start developing a team under me. So the next 10 years or so were pretty normal, difficult growth things for our company. But I want to touch on a few interesting things that transpired during that time. Probably the most significant one, and I did a speech, like a TED Talk type thing for Tugboat. How many Tugboat people do we have in here? Okay, Tugboat's a great organization here about keeping your business in the family. And they asked me to do a video on this, and I labeled it, How I Transform My Company by Transforming Myself. And it started out like this. Her name was Rosalie Stegall. And one day, at the end of the shift, she said to me, Bruce, come here and sit here in this chair right here. Sit down. And I came over and sat down. Everybody was leaving. And she said, Bruce, nobody likes you here, and you're nothing like your dad. And I was like, what a punch in the face. I said, thank you, Rosalie. Well, I spent 3 days and nights agonizing over her comments and being defensive and saying, you ought to fire her, you know. But I finally realized, you know, she's right. My father had something that I did not have. I looked at people from an engineering standpoint, spreadsheets and everything, Lotus 1-2-3 spreadsheets. And I said, well, what does my father have that I don't have? And the answer was, he inspired people, and I did not do that. And I realized at that time, I really needed to learn how to inspire people. And I worked at it and worked at it. And eventually, I did transform myself. I didn't look quite that tough, though. Without this transformation, I'll tell you right now, I would not be here today. But I learned from my father and how to inspire people and how to make people want to do better and perform better. And that was his secret. And I learned that. Not as well as he, but I'm hoping someday I will be as good at it as he did. But I owe this growth and this transformation to Rosalie. And I saw her many times afterwards over the years, and every time I'd see her out in town or whatever, I'd say, go up and give her a hug and say, Rosalie, you saved the company, you saved me. And she told me one day, she said, Bruce, God told me what to say. And I said, I don't believe you, Rosalie, because if God had told you what to say, he would have been a little more kindly toward me. The next decade and a half, we grew. There were lots of challenges. I ran the company basically by consensus. I tried to do that as much as possible. We had leaders in the company, and we would have discussions and arguments and back and forth. And one of the things I would do is when there was a disagreement, and I'd go, or they'd kind of all get together and say, we ought to do A. And I'd say, no, guys, I think we need to do B. I didn't want to take myself off the team by overriding them, okay, because that kind of spoils a team, you know, when the bug boss comes in and says, no, I'm overriding you. So instead of doing that, I would come in the next day after a discussion like that, and I'd say, you guys, I got called in by the board of directors, me. I was the sole board member, okay, board of directors. So I got called in, and I told them exactly what your plan was and what you wanted to do, and I sold them on it. I tried to sell them on it, but they overruled that decision, and we're going to go with A or B, whichever it was, B. We're going to go with that. And I said, I argued with them as much as I could, but they're going to end up going with this plan, which happened to be my plan. And they understood. They absolutely knew what I was saying was, I don't want to override you as a team member, but by gosh, this is what we're going to do because I own this company. So that worked out very well. We built a team. All of you know when you grow a team and the company grows, you outgrow people, you replace. You outgrow, you replace. And then sometimes you find somebody that grows right up with you, and that's always spectacular when that happens. So the key is developing a team. But I want to talk about a couple other challenges while we're on this. First of all, in the first 20 years of business, I was kicked out of 3 banks. And some of you are probably in here right now. Where are you? Fortunately, we've got Regions and BMO. Regions is here. I don't know whether BMO is here today or not, but they do a great job for supporting us today, and really, really appreciate that. But I hope they don't kick me out again, okay? I've had enough of that. We also had a unionization attempt. We fortunately won that. It was a huge challenge for us. I learned at that time, after the unionization attempt, I learned we needed an HR manager, and we needed better communications, and we needed a handbook so our employees knew what to expect. So behind every successful business, there's always somebody biting their fingernails, and that was me. During this period of time, I would not go home at night unless all of our machines were running well, all the employees were happy, or I was totally exhausted. Well, guess what? I went home totally exhausted every night, okay? Over the years, I finally came to the conclusion I was probably never going to have a perfect company, and I had to accept the fact that the machines probably will never all run perfectly, and the people will probably never be completely happy. But I was wrong, because our machines actually run pretty good. So there's many, many sleepless nights, and probably about 20 years or 15 years ago or something, when I first met Peter, who's been a fantastic advisor, he said to me, Bruce, you need to go to the seminar. I went to the seminar, and they basically said in there, entrepreneurs like me tend to grow their companies up to about $10 million, and they either keep doing everything themselves, or they start hiring people that are smarter than them, and they continue to grow. And I thought, well, there's nobody smarter than me. And then I started hiring other teammates, outside people and stuff like that, and all of a sudden I realized everybody was smarter than me. That's when we really started to grow. And in 1998, we opened up our integrated supply business. Why did we? What motivated us to do that? A lot of our customers were hiring integrated suppliers to take over their business and buy their product. And they were throwing the regrind drills away because they can make more money on new tools than on regrinds. So I realized if I don't get into that business, we're going to have no regrind business left. So I found out about an integrated supply contract coming up at Northrop Grumman. I spent weeks putting together the proposal. I put it out to Northrop Grumman. When we found out we had lost, I hopped on an airplane and flew out to talk directly face-to-face to the buyer and say, why did we not win this? And he looked at me square in the eyes and said, Bruce, you didn't win this because you don't know what you're doing in integrated supply. And I argued with him and gave him the sales pitch and all that stuff. And on the way back, I said to my vice president of sales then, I said, Randy, I said, he's right, we don't know what we're doing. Who is that guy down in Alabama, I think you said? Did I get it right? Okay. Who was that guy down in Alabama who you said was really good at distribution and stuff like that, and you really like him? And his name was Mike Ball. And Mike Ball joined our company in 1998, and with the express purpose of setting us up in integrated supply. The first ISA, Industrial Supply Association meeting that we went to, Randy and I stood there like, what are we supposed to say to all these people coming up to our booth? And he said, I don't know. And I said, let's listen to Mike for a while, okay? And we listened to Mike, and we finally kind of figured out what to talk about and all that. So Mike set up our total integrated supply and product management process. We grew very nicely. You can see after about 5 years of setup and everything, in 2006, we started really growing rapidly. That's, by the way, when Brent came to the company. We'll talk about that in a minute. And we grew very rapidly until we ended up growing to $500 million, which I actually prefer to say $500 million. Okay, who is that? Anybody? Who is this? Dr. Evil. Okay, what movie? What movie? It was actually Dr. Evil, and it's Mike Myers, and it's Austin Powers. And by the way, if you really want to get some good succession planning, you can watch this movie, and he was training his son to take over his evil empire. So good, very good training. By the way, on the chart back here, let me back up one, you can see that COVID and the 737 MAX had no impact on us whatsoever. So it takes a team to build a company, and most of the time you got to build that team internally. And I really believe in starting early, and we did. This is Brent testing out the president's chair many, many years earlier. But as time went on, I realized that we really needed more help. We needed a Superman to come in and help us run the company. And that's when Brent came in 2009. That's Superman and Superwoman and Superboy right there. Actually, just so you know, he doesn't wear that every day, and that's not real. That's really Halloween. So Brent came into the company at 2009. I was very fortunate, just like my father. I'm very, very blessed to have a competent, capable, and interested son who's interested in the business. Our team grew rapidly during this time. Jim Galati, Mike Ball, myself, Brent. This is really the team that led us through that explosive growth of the company. Like I said, it takes a team, and the team just did fantastic. So after a while, it's time to turn it over to the next generation. I've been building this company. You can see me in my construction clothes here. Been building this company for a long time, and about 10 years ago, I started realizing it's time for me to start obsoleting myself. I'm getting old. I know everybody can see that, and it's time to start passing it on to the next generation. So I started backing off of things, like not answering if a problem came up. We'd be in a meeting, I'd say, I know the solution to that. I know how we do that. And I would cut off discussion. If an email came out of some big problem, I'd answer the email right away. And I started not doing that. I started backing off of that. And all of a sudden, I started realizing that the solutions, if I had just shut up all those years and let the team answer many of these solutions, they came up with better ideas than I did. And so it became really exciting to back off and let other people make decisions and all that kind of stuff. So we built a management team for the plant. Denny Baus is the plant manager. He took over from me a couple years ago. Brent's the president now. Brent has put together a leadership team in the integrated supply that we meet weekly. I participate a little bit in that. I'm still active in the business, but Brent runs the integrated supply, and I spend most of my time in the grinding division. And what I really like to do is design machines. There's a machine I designed at Christmas time, this winter. Another machine I'm working on right now, actually, and another design that I just popped up there. And I expect to be continuing to be involved with the company and involved with it until the batteries on my hover-round wear out in the future. And they'll haul me out of the plant in a wheelbarrow. So the next generation, estate planning. Estate planning is where it is. When you get a company to a certain size, you cannot pass it on to the next generation because of taxes unless you plan well in advance and you get trusted advisors. And I have some incredible trusted advisors like Steve Diker of Harrison Held and Alan Singer, St. Louis Trust, Spencer, and of St. Louis Trust, and Peter Rayson, Moneta. These are the people that put together a plan, and we've been working on this for 15 years. If you don't do that and plan ahead, and you have a catastrophic event, like if I had died 15 years ago, the company would have had to have been sold in order to pay the taxes. It's a huge, huge issue, and it takes a very capable individuals to get all that pulled together. As I said, I'm very lucky that I've got a capable, competent son. My other kids are not involved in the company, but they have great respect for the company. These are my kids here. You can see kind of a neat photo here. This is 20 years ago, and and more recently, and we all have the same poses, okay, and sitting in the same position. I think Brent set that photo up. So I've got the same number of kids as my father had, so how am I going to do it differently than my father? Because I know it didn't work well that way. Well, I know I'm not going to give it evenly, okay? So that doesn't work. So how am I going to do it? Well, if you're not going to divide it evenly, you have to divide it unevenly. And so I want to make sure to put together a plan where the stock does not get diluted. I see companies that the stock gets diluted in the families until you have 20, 30 stockholders. They all got their hand out, and one person is working for the entire family trying to keep the company going, and I don't want that to happen to the company. So what I did is I've set it up where Brent gets the stock, the other kids get all the rest of my stuff, okay? So the question is, how did I communicate that? I actually had a meeting with the kids. In fact, that photograph was taken during that meeting. Okay, and I sat down with them and said, you guys, this is the way I want to do it. My kids, my other 3 kids, have a huge respect for the company. They realize that all of our family wealth has come from that company, and they want to protect it. And they have a great deal of respect for that. So it isn't an even split, but as we talked about, Brent could screw the company up, and he gets nothing, okay? He could also make it grow tremendously and pass it on to the next generation, in which he never really gets a big payout. Or he could sell it the day after I die and cash in. He has all those prerogatives, but they get something, they get a fair shake, in my view, because they don't have the risk involved. So wash, rinse, repeat. The next generation transfer is up to Brent. That's not my problem. His action plan is in motion. And hopefully we're looking at the leaders of the next generation, and Brent will do a great job of getting fantastic advisors like I did, all of who are sitting in this room, to help guide him to being able to keep the company intact and bring the company forward. So a few more pictures of the grandkids. You can see that we've got them at work already. They're polishing the floors with their feet and dancing and so on. So I'm very proud of our company. And I just have one wish that I know is not possible, but I would love to have my father come back for 2 hours and take him on a tour of what his wisdom and his perseverance brought about. So thank you very much.
So I think in the spirit of time, I'm just going to ask one question then before you leave.
Okay.
In your experience, what are the key factors that contribute to the long-term success of a family business?
Well, first of all, as I said, structuring you have to have the stock ownership and the leadership decided. And you can't, like my father did, you can't just throw it out there. It has to be done by the person who's in control and who is responsible for that and has the control. My father threw us into a very difficult situation. We recovered from it, and our family gets along great, and it's all wonderful. But without that, you really have a very difficult situation. The second thing is you've got to hire people that are good, solid people that help you lead the company forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you again
thank
for
you.
your time.